Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about ownership and just a little bit about the usefulness of things, but that'll probably have to wait until another episode to go really in depth into. This is really a multifaceted topic that has been on my mind ever since I was a little kid. In grade school, we got an assignment for science class. This is first grade. We had to go and find a bug and capture it and bring it into class the following day. And we would all study them. We'd look at them and learn about bugs. So I could not bring myself to trap a bug. I just couldn't do it. I broke down, and my mom said that I didn't have to do it. And we found a June bug molting, and she said, bring this in, we'll put it in a little box, and that'll have to do. So that's what we did. We got a June bug molting, brought that into class. That morning, my best friend runs up to me, and he's super excited, and he's got a little plastic box of his own, and in there he's got a grasshopper. And he goes, look at my grasshopper. And it wasn't his fault. And I get that, but I lost my mind and I snapped at him and I yelled and I really upset him, and I'm guilty about that to this day. I yelled at him, that's not your grasshopper. You can't own that grasshopper. I knew even back then that we can't own anything. Ownership is an unnatural, fabricated concept. You can't own the earth or the animals on it or the sky above or the water or any of it or any of the things on it. You can't own them. So what does ownership really even mean? Well, okay, ownership gives a person rights and duties over property. And what constitutes as property has, changed and evolved over the years. Naturally, because it's a completely made up thing. I mean, people used to be property, and I'm not just talking about slaves. When a man married his wife and all the children she bore him were his property. To me, it's just a ridiculous concept that you could ever have ownership over anything, especially anyone. How do you create a thief? You create ownership. Part of me thinks that ownership probably evolved when things were actually scarce, when food and shelter were actually scarce and people needed to actually compete for those things, back hundreds of thousands of years ago when we were actually animals. So ownership kind of evolved because we didn't want to share. So at some point, some greedy motherfucker was like, okay, this is mine and you can't have it. And we went along with it. It is a dangerous and antiquated notion. And it's such a huge part of all the problems that the entire world is facing today. It's basically right up there with money. It's that bad. So let's break it down. If you want to have something and keep it away from everyone else, then you have to either rely on them agreeing with you and just going, oh yeah, you have that thing, I can't have it, and have them be cool with that, or you need to create some kind of system through which you can enforce your having that thing and other people not having it. So basically what you need to do is create laws to protect your property and then also invent a way to enforce those laws. So you're starting to see where this gets a little nefarious. You invent an entire system of physical enforcement that sole purpose is to protect things, to keep things in one person's possession instead of another person. So what happens if one person or group of people really needs those things and they can't get access to them? And what if you have a lot of those things that people need and can't get access to, like food or shelter or clean water or useful tools? If you really want to keep all those things away from those people that need them, you have to be willing to do some really awful things. And all of those awful things are just going to be in the name of property. And that's fucked up. So not only does ownership create the need for laws and then a cast of people who are able to lawfully, physically enforce those laws, it's also just incredibly wasteful. I am willing to bet that 90% of all the shit that you own sits totally unused 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days out of the year. Look at all of the shit that you own. Just take a gander at everything around you that you own. Books, tools, instruments, really useful things that just sit around your apartment or your house, just wasted, useless. And I'm just as bad. I'm not saying I'm great at this whole sharing thing. The office in which I sit has basically become a repository for the shit that I don't use. And like, what happens if I give all these things away to charity, to people that might be able to use them? Well, the odds are good they're gonna sit in that person's house unused 24 hours a day. They'll use it like once, like I used a lot of this stuff once, and then it's not gonna get used again because so much of the shit we have is pointless. I mean, obviously there are some things that we use a lot that are really, really useful to us. I mean, like your phone, your clothing, your shoes, your computer, stuff that is so incredibly useful and you wanna have readily available to you all the time. Then there are some things that are incredibly useful, but that we only use very intermittently. Like your car, if you're lucky enough to have a car. We have the data to show that almost every single privately owned car spends 95% of its entire lifetime parked. That means, get your head around this, every privately owned vehicle spends 95% of its entire lifespan taking up space doing nothing. 95%! Someone else could be using that. And like those cars that are sitting parked doing nothing 95% of the time, ownership of almost all things is that wasteful. It keeps things out of the hands of people that could actually be using them. And it also creates a need for incredibly harmful, wasteful infrastructure like parking garages. So we can put our unused, wasted cars there all day and night. It's bordering on tragic. Then let's look at just how useful so much of the shit we own really is. Just take a gander at half the shit that you own and ask yourself, is this really useful? I think it's gonna have to be its own separate episode, but I'm willing to bet most of the shit that we own is not actually useful. And I'm also willing to bet that not only is it pointless, but that most of the shit we own, by its very existence, is detrimental to the entire world as a whole. So the sharing economy is getting a lot of press recently, and I think it's a step very much in the right direction. The model exists already and has existed for a long time in the form of the lending library. If there were accessible, common distributories for useful things, and they were always free, it would solve so many of these big problems. Ownership creates this unnatural me versus you mentality. I've got my stuff, you've got your stuff, don't touch my shit. And we all unconsciously know that it's wrong. As an adult, when you look at little kids and they're playing with each other and they've got some toys and one kid is being super selfish and is keeping all the shit to themselves, you go, don't be an ass, be nice, share with so-and-so. We all know sharing is good. We all know hoarding is bad. We all kind of know, and if we didn't already know, we're very much learning that the police force, no matter what form it takes, exists almost solely to protect property of the propertied classes and to keep stuff away from the people that could actually be using it. The police keep goods and opportunities out of the hands of the people that really need them. If we could get over the false concept of ownership and property, we could save space, save raw materials, create a culture of sharing and selflessness, and make really good use of all the shit that we already have instead of throwing away a bunch of stuff and creating more typically pointless, useless things for people to hoard. But instead of creating good, solid, well-built, durable, useful things, we create millions and millions and billions of units of completely shitty, wasteful, pointless crap that's usually gonna break and get thrown away into some landfill after it's sat most of its life on some fucking shelf. I think this whole thing is gonna need a second video. We're gonna have to be able to talk about the usefulness of things, housing, production, and distribution. But this was, at least for my own mental health, a good place to start.